Hi, I'm Chris Grovatin, staff writer for The Pit, and today we're talking to Dino Cazares of Fear Factory about the new vinyl pressing of Demanufacture. It is the first vinyl pressing of Demanufacture in the US, and it's available now for pre-order. It's a limited edition pressing, so you should pre-order yours now. Dino, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
No problem. Happy to be here to talk anything Fear Factory.
And so the first thing I wanted to ask is this is, such an important album for metal, such an important album for me, like in my development as a metalhead. I wanted to ask, man, when you think about this album or, listen to it or look back on it, like what's your first gut feeling or memory? What comes to mind immediately?
The first feeling that comes to mind is like the road that we took to make this record. It wasn't an easy record to record, but it was an easy record to write. We wrote it pretty quick for about 3.5 months. After we were done writing the record, we were supposed to go right into record, but we ended up getting a call to go on tour with Sepultura, and we weren't going to pass that up. So we ended up going on the road for Sepultura for a month and a half or so, and then right after that, we went right back into recording this record.
That's crazy, man. When you came in to record the record, did you find you had gleaned some Sepultura? Had Sepultura rubbed off on you after touring with them?
Well, definitely they're that kind of band, yeah. But we didn't really take any of the influence from Sepultura because we had already written the record. But definitely their energy that they have. At that time they were a great band. They were on Chaos AD record, I believe. And we were on that tour with them, and it was great times. We were in an RV, they were in a bus, and there was one time where somebody left the RV door open, and their bus came driving by us, and they literally hit the door and just ruined the door. So, and this was like pretty much in the winter, and so it was pretty cold.
That's amazing yet brutal.
Yes.
Was going in to record an album after just getting off a tour, were you guys feeling it all like worn down, or were you just riding that energy into the recording?
No, we were definitely not feeling worn down. We're definitely riding the energy, being on tour and playing all those killer places with them and having a great experience. We were just excited to get into the studio, record the record, and then, go back out on tour basically. For metal bands like us, touring is the main income. So you have to pretty much stay on the road to survive.
When Demanufacture was written, sort of what was going on in LA that was influencing you guys? Were there specific bands or specific scenes that you felt like were either inspiring you guys, or maybe standing as something you wanted to go against, something you didn't want to be?
Well, being in Los Angeles, it was a big melting pot of all kinds of things happening. From 1992 to about 1994, there was a lot of things that happened in Los Angeles that really pretty much influenced us lyrically, and also the title. In 92, we had the Rodney King riots. We pretty much seen LA pretty much destroy itself with fires, people looting, people rioting, people, fighting each other. I think you guys know the story of the 1992 riots, right? We've seen people protecting their businesses. We've seen people, with bullhorns and rifles outside their business so they wouldn't get looted. I remember I was on top of the roof of our apartment building, and there was a Ferrari dealership or an exotic car dealership just across the road. And we just heard bullets going. We could hear the air from the bullets whizzing by our head because they were like shooting at each other, making sure nobody was going to go, riot the exotic car dealership. So, we experienced all that. We experienced the National Guard, because we had a curfew in Los Angeles. So they brought out the National Guard just to pretty much control the streets. So that was one of the big influences. And we just saw Los Angeles being destroyed, because shortly after that, we had fires that pretty much burned up all the trees in the mountains here. And then we had the massive rains that we had, which created a lot of mudslides because all the trees were gone. And we literally seen people's houses really, in a massive mudslide getting swept away, going down the street, people just massive disasters and stuff. And then after that, we had a big earthquake in 1994, which we got evicted from our apartment because it had to be condemned, because I could literally stick my hand through the wall to go outside, because the crack in the wall was so big that I was able to stick my hand through the outside and shake somebody's hand on the outside. It was so thick, and so we got evicted, and then we got the Sepultura tour, and then right after that, it was just like Demanufacture. That was the title of the record. It was just a fitting title from where we lived and what we experienced and what we saw in those 3 to 4 years. The manufacturing of our city obviously being destroyed. So I think demanufacture, I'm not even sure if it's a real word, but I think you kind of get what it means. It's opposite of manufacture, right? This is like our cities is being destroyed. Demanufacture was a fitting title. So that's how we came up with the title. And a lot of the lyrics were influenced by that.
That's so interesting, just because it sounds like you guys were very much living this experience of watching all these crazy things happen around you. And I think today with the internet, we have this idea of kind of like digital life versus like analog life, like versus real life. And meanwhile, you guys made this very electronically influenced, almost like digitally influenced record about the very real and tangible things you guys were feeling during this time.
Definitely it rubbed off on us lyrically, and I think the aggression definitely rubbed off on us. Just like I said, seeing our city fall apart definitely influenced us with the energy of the record as well. Burton would write lyrics, and I would picture what it would sound like, and that's pretty much not just the lyrics, but just like I said, our surroundings. I was like, what would this sound like? What would this and we were also very futuristic thinking and concepts and things like that, and so. We wanted all the electronic element involved, and we wanted the machine-like feel for this record.
Was that a sort of active push to include more of that? Because this record definitely feels like a jump from Soul of the New Machine to here, where you guys really are embracing the industrial influences that before sounded like sort of on the sidelines of what Fear Factory were.
In order to describe Demanufacture, you got to describe the road that it took us to get to that record. If you go back to the first record, we weren't exactly, we couldn't afford, all the electronic elements that we wanted to add into the band. So we try to do it, just with guitars, the conventional stuff, you know what I mean? Guitars, bass, and drums. And the thing that bridged where we were from Soul of a New Machine to Demanufacture, the thing that bridged it was Fear's The Mind Killer, which was an industrial remix that the guys from Frontline Assembly did. Reese Fulber and Bill Lieb. I believe it was mixed by Greg Reilly as well. When we were going into writing for Demanufacture, we were like, okay, we need to write with some keyboards in mind. We had the basic ideas of how the melodies should go with the keyboards and how it fits with the music. But it really wasn't until Reese Fulber came in and, added all of his electronic elements, everything that we wanted. He had back then, the computers, I believe, was an Atari computer, or Ontari computer, something like that. Everything, a lot of things were on floppy disks. Remember the old school floppy disks? There wasn't really any form of. We couldn't afford Pro Tools, so a lot of the stuff was still kind of organic, in a way. It wasn't until he came in and really shaped this record to what it was going to sound like. There's a lot of things that we could talk, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. But like just when Reese Fulber came in, he added a lot of elements to it that we were missing. And that, like I said, Fear's Mind Killer was the one EP that bridged the gap between Soul of a New Machine to Demanufacture.
Bringing this up as a segue to something I wanted to talk about, which is that I know that there was the story goes that originally Colin Richardson was producing this album, but he wanted to stick with the sort of death metal and traditional metal elements, but that you guys really wanted to push it in a more electronic and digital direction. And I was wondering if that was the case, if that was sort of your interaction with him.
Well, when we went into record, it was a lot of things that happened, and we felt as we were going along. Actually, I felt as we were going along that my vision was definitely much more different than what Colin's vision was. Because after meeting Reese Fulber, my mind just started to go crazy. And I was like, there's so much we could do. When it came time to mixing the album, Colin Richardson actually said, I don't want Dino here during the mixes. So Colin actually took the tapes and he flew back to England to go mix the album. And at the same time, I was having conversations with Reese Fulber saying, I think we need to get Greg Reilly to mix this record because I don't believe Colin's going to be able to handle all this. Because there was a lot of keyboards. And, we wanted all that in the forefront. You know what I mean? I just felt that Colin was probably going to bury those things because I just didn't think that he really knew. I don't think he's ever done anything like that before. If he has, I had never heard of it. But so I started to have some serious doubt that he was going to be able to handle a mix that was going to be able to make us happy. Monty Connor, our A&R guy, I convinced him, and I said, "Hey, look, if Colin does these mixes and they don't come back exactly how we want them, would you be into this?" And he was kind of a little hesitant at first, but I convinced Monty Connor, and I told him, "Look, it's probably going to come back where the keyboards are going to be buried." And I was telling him, what I wanted to hear, and I said, "Look, I think that the keyboards need to be up front. I think this is the direction that this band needs to go in." And so he eventually said yes. So when the mixes came back from Colin Richardson and they realized that I was right, that the keyboards were buried, Monty Connor just let me take control of the record. And he's like, get your team, Greg Reilly, Reese Fulber. We'll get the tapes flown back to LA and we'll start mixing. And then we went into a studio called the Enterprise Studios here in Los Angeles, California. It turned out to be one of the kids that was in Star Trek. He ended up buying that studio, and he called it the Enterprise. So every studio was named after something from Star Trek, which is really cool. So we went in to start mixing the record, and instantly, the minute Reese and Greg started doing their work, it was like, wow, we already started to hear what we felt was the way we needed to sound like. And thankfully those two guys, pretty much helped out us achieve that sound we wanted. Well, when we first started recording the record, we ended up going to a place called Chicago Tracks, which is in Chicago.
Okay.
Bands like Ministries recorded there. A bunch of industrial guys, a bunch of industrial bands or guys involved in industrial recorded at the studio. So when we got there, we were really excited. We're like, we're going to go in there. We're going to make this great industrial record. We're at this industrial, very well-known industrial studio. We get there, and the place was just an absolute shithole. It was horrible. The control board was just, there was a lot of channels that didn't work. A lot of channels that were cracking, making electronic crackling noise, When we started to record the drums, you can hear those noises in the drum tracks.
Crazy.
And the engineer's like, "Oh, don't worry, you're not going to hear it. Many of you put guitars and everything, you're not going to hear all this cracking noise." We're like, "No, we're not going to stay here." The computer kept crashing. So even if we did record something, it wouldn't save it. You know what I mean? So we were like, we needed to get out of here. So we wasted $16,000 there, $16,000. And remember, this is our second record. The record label was behind us, but, they gave us a budget. So we were trying to stick within that budget. So we ended up, somebody said, "Hey man, there's a place called Bearsville Studios, which is in Bearsville, New York, and it's available at the time you guys need it. So you guys might want to go up there and record. We heard it's a great studio, blah, blah, blah." There's a house there as well that they supply for you so you can stay at the house. And we were like, Bearsville Studios, that sounds familiar. That was where Metallica did And Justice for All.
Oh, rad.
So we were like, okay, let's go there, let's go there. Metallica, of course, So we ended up getting there up in Bearsville. Bearsville is in upstate New York, and its neighboring city is Woodstock. So very small town, as you can see,
Yeah.
Very small town. So we get there and we're like, holy shit, this is a really small place. Like is there any restaurants? There's like one bar in town. It was really cool though. So we went in there just to start recording, and we walked into the place. It was like beautiful. Like, wow, this place is beautiful. It was very nice, and the studio was actually in this big mansion, right? And there was 2 studios in there, beautiful. And they also had a barn in the back where you can actually record there as well too. And the barn's set up really nice and everything. So we were in the main studio, and we ended up tracking drums in the main studio because it's a really big, nice big room to get that nice, snare sound and cymbals. Got done recording there, and then we ended up going to the barn to record guitars, bass, and vocals. And then once we were done there, we ended up going to back into the house, into the smaller room to try to start some pre-mixes. So while we were in there, of course, we were blasting it really loud, right? And next door, Bon Jovi had moved in. And this is actually in the Bon Jovi bio, right? Bon Jovi moved in next door. We were cranking really loud. The engineer came over and said, hey, you need to turn that down because it's bleeding into the Bon Jovi drum mics. Because they were trying to do drums. So the volume of our record was going through the drum mics, and it was actually being recorded on the Bon Jovi tracks. So they actually left because of us. They actually left the studio because of us. It's actually in their Wikipedia page. You can read that story. It's there. It's hilarious.
It's like a perfect sum up of the 90s. Was Fear Factory so loud that Bon Jovi had to leave, man?
They left the studio. Yep. They went somewhere else. But there was also one time where Reese Fulber was on a payphone. Believe it or not, there was payphones back then. So Reese Fulber was on the payphone in the house. There was a payphone. So he's on the payphone, and a guy comes walking by, and Reese Fulber thinks it's one of the runners. A runner who go out and pick up food for you, or they'll drive you somewhere, or whatever, right? So Reese thought it was a runner, and he told the runner, hey man, can you go down the street, go down over here and go get me a sandwich? Tell him to put extra mayo, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, just kind of looked at him and just kind of kept walking. And Reese is like, well, what an asshole, right? Well, the person he asked was John Bon Jovi. He had no idea who it was, which is hilarious.
He said he's a good Jersey boy,
Yeah, if you're not into that scene, you just don't know who he is, right? So one time I was upstairs in the lounge, and here comes I was watching TV, and here comes Heather Locklear with a bottle of wine. And she's like, oh my God, I don't mean to be so rude. You guys want some wine? Let me get you guys a couple of glasses. So she got us a couple of glasses, and she started to pour me some wine. I don't drink wine, but I'm not going to say no to Heather Locklear, And so we were watching TV. She goes, oh, you mind if I have the remote and I change the channel? I'm like, sure, go for it. So she starts flickering through the channel, and she puts on TJ Hooker. She was on that show a long time ago. I don't know. You probably don't. It's probably way before your time.
I'm sorry to say, man, I've never seen an episode of TJ Hooker in my life.
Well, after this interview, go up and look up TJ Hooker. All right. So she put on the show that she was on back in the 80s or early, late 80s, early 90s. And she's like, oh, no, we can't watch that. It was one of her shows. And we were like, no, leave it on there, And I don't know. We just had a little bit of a conversation with her, and she was really nice. And I ended up drinking some wine with her. So that was one of my really cool experiences there at Bearsville.
Man, that's crazy that it sounds like basically you guys came from Los Angeles to upstate New York, to this tiny town in upstate New York, and that's where you had all these star-studded experiences, is in cold-ass upstate New York.
Exactly, right? Running into Bon Jovi, the whole band, meeting Richie Sambora, Heather Locklear, the whole thing with Reese mistaking John Bon Jovi for a guy to go get some sandwich. But one of the other cool things that happened is that we were having issues with the guitar tone. Colin Richardson. This is probably our first fight between me and Colin. He wasn't really liking what I was using. After about 5 days of just going back and forth and arguing and trying to find the right tone, I went down to a little convenience store down the street from the studio. There was a guy there, and I was like, I recognize this guy. I go, this guy looks familiar. Anyways, he ended up asking us, "Hey man, you guys in a band?" I'm like, "Recording up down the road at a place called Bearsville." He goes, "Yeah, I know that place." And I go, "Yeah, I started telling him my issues. Yeah, the producer's not really happy with my guitar tone, blah 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 blah." And he goes, "Well, hey man, I got some gear you can borrow." And I go, "What band are you in?" And he goes, "I'm in Bad Brains. I'm Dr. No." And I knew it. I knew it. So he was a guitar player in Bad Brains, and his name was Dr. No. And I guess he was living up there for a while, and he had a little convenience store. Later that day, he ended up bringing a bunch of gear to the studio, and we ended up using some of his gear that he definitely helped save the guitar tone on that record.
Dude, between like that, drinking Heather Locklear's wine, it sounds like it took a village to make Demanufacture. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was some good things and bad things. I mean, the bad part, like I said earlier, we had to get extra money from the record company to get Greg Reilly and Reese Fulber to mix the record. We ended up firing Colin and getting those two guys to work on the album. And things started to run a lot smoother. Reese Fulber and Greg Reilly knew exactly what we were talking about, what we wanted it to sound like. Frontline Assembly had just finished a record before that called Millennium, which was also influenced by Fear is the Mind Killer because they wanted to put guitar on their record, which they haven't had guitar in a long time. Fear is the Mind Killer was definitely a record that influenced us and Frontline Assembly. So, and I'm sure countless of other bands, but as far as the guys working on that stuff and creating that stuff, it definitely inspired us to take that next step that it needed to be to make this groundbreaking record.
It's interesting hearing this idea of you going sort of all in on the industrial and digital elements while, someone like Colin was like wanted to bury them and whatnot. I was wondering, just because, the mid 90s was this real booming, like fertile ground for electronic music. Did you ever have a moment where even you yourself were like, you know what, I'm going too industrial, I'm going too digital, I need to avoid basically almost like writing a techno song or something like that?
No, we definitely never felt that way because, like I said, if you listen to Fears of Mind Killer, two of the tracks on there are very techno, electronic techno type stuff, because that's what we were into at that time. A lot of the backyard parties in Los Angeles when we were playing would be like, we're playing metal. Then after we're done, the place would turn into, a techno party. We really got into that stuff way back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Early Prodigy and a band called Messiah, and just a whole slew of other bands that we were into that were doing all that stuff. Meat Beat Manifesto. I don't know if you ever heard of them. Yeah, just all kinds of stuff. And so, and the first time we went to Europe on the first record back in 1992, 1993, we went to a few raves when we were out there in Europe. So it was great. So a lot of that stuff was already ingrained in me and Raymond, the drummer. We were really into it. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do Fears the Mind Killer remix. So choosing that direction in Demanufacture was exactly what we wanted to do. So any of the techno stuff, we were definitely not afraid of it. It was back before, everybody could talk shit on social media. There was no social media at that time. So if somebody didn't like it, whatever, you know what I mean? You didn't really think about it because you didn't have to read it. You know what I mean? Sure, there was, you can read reviews in magazines and you can get, sometimes artists are sensitive, and some of them can't handle the criticism. That's just because, and I get why, because a lot of people put their heart into it. And all of a sudden here just comes somebody, hears it the first time and says it's crap. You know what I mean? So it definitely does, affect you in one way or another. So, for all those young artists getting into the music industry nowadays, you got to have thick skin. You got to be able to handle the criticism. There's always going to be somebody there ready to criticize your music who never picked up guitar, never picked up drums, never sang, never recorded an album. They don't really know the process that you went through to make a record and all the, inner fighting between the band, and the pain and struggle that it took to make this record. They don't know what it's like. And then all of a sudden they just say, hey, man, this sucks. And then, of course, you take it personally. You're like, oh, because all these emotions run through your head. Like, do you know what it took for this record to come out? But luckily, when Demanufacture came out, it was every review was 10 out of 10. 5 out of 5, 100 out of 100. It was just all across the board. And I think the reason why that was not only because the songwriting was good, we had a lot of great songs on the record. It was the sound, it was the tone, it was the cover, it was things that people haven't heard before. I'm not going to say we're like pioneers, but I think we created our own niche. You know what I mean? That a lot of people on both sides could get into. And when I say both sides, I mean like the metal and I mean the industrial. You know what I mean? Because shortly after that, we released Remanufacture, which is the remix album to Demanufacture, which really, that opened a lot of doors for us as well, too. And we had some pretty famous people working on Remanufacture. And that was a guy named Thomas Hokenberg, who now has been doing like massive soundtracks. I think he did the Joker. I think he did, a lot of the Batman soundtracks and numerous of others. He did a couple of DJ tracks for us on Remanufacture, and as well as Reese Fulber and a handful of other guys. But yeah, Demanufacture and Remanufacture were definitely things that opened the door for us. When Demanufacture came out, everybody was calling, said we want this band to come open up for us. And the one person that called was Ozzy Osbourne. And Ozzy's like, you got to go on tour with me. And so we were direct support to Ozzy on his Retirement Sucks tour. And, we pretty much toured with him worldwide. It was amazing. It was a great experience playing big places with Ozzy. Megadeth called. We went on tour with Megadeth. We went on tour with Iron Maiden. Yeah, it really opened the door for, to tour with all these bands and to meet all these artists that we grew up listening to when we were kids,
Was there ever a moment where you were like, holy shit? Like, were you ever going to like an MTV Awards show or like, having these guys who were your idols coming to you being like, you got to open for me, where you were like, looked at the other dudes in the band being like, is this happening? Holy shit, I can't believe this is all coming down.
Well, there was one incident where, when Megadeth asked us to go on tour with them. Now, I met Dave Mustaine when I was like 18 years old, and he was doing his first record. And I used to work at a sandwich shop right next to a recording studio, and across the street from the Hollywood Palladium, where there was a lot of concerts, right? So I met a lot of artists, and one of the artists I met was Dave Mustaine. I used to give him free food just to pick his brain, right? Dave Mustaine gave me a lot of advice in the beginning of my career. He would come into the sandwich shop. I'd give him sandwiches. I'd give him beer, and I would just ask him a bunch of questions. And he gave me a lot of advice on what to do to get out there, try to make a band, a lot of industry questions, things like that. So fast forward, that was like 1985 or 84, right? Fast forward to 1995, Demanufacture comes out. Dave Mustaine requests us to be on the tour. And I'm thinking, in my mind, wow, Dave's returning the favor. Because, gave him all these sandwiches and food back in the day. And I thought he was there to return the favor. So I told everybody in my band, yeah, Dave Mustaine's taking us out on tour because of me, right? Because of me. So the first day of the tour, we get there. We see Dave. We start talking to Dave. I was like, hey, Dave, man, remember me? Remember me? And he's like, yeah, I remember you. Make me a sandwich. So the whole band was just laughing at me like, oh, my God. He just said, make him a sandwich. So that was like the one joke that everybody, would say to me on tour. Hey, man, make me a sandwich, So
there you go, man. For the record, I have to ask, was there a signature Dave Mustaine sandwich? Is there a sandwich?
You're the first person to ask me that, but no, I don't remember what I made him. We'll have to ask him. Maybe he remembers.
Sure. I mean, it's funny because I just had this moment of being like, what is the perfect Dave Mustaine sandwich?
I wish I would have remembered that.
Obviously, this is the first pressing in the United States of Demanufacture on vinyl. And something that, I thought was really fascinating is that this was such a digital album. It was, so industrial. It came out at the height of, CDs. and now it's sort of coming full circle and it's being produced on this analog format. And I was wondering, man, first of all, do you listen to vinyl? Do you collect vinyl? And is this strange for you watching this ultra digital album now becoming a piece of wax, you know?
I definitely don't collect vinyl. I do have a little bit of a vinyl collection, only stuff that I've worked on that's come out on vinyl. So I have that, but you know, I have the original pressings that were only done in Europe, not here in the US. I don't know why we never made vinyl in the US. I think at the time, maybe it wasn't really that big of a deal here, compared to how it's been for the last 10 years or so. But yeah, I don't really have a massive vinyl collection or nothing like that. Like I said, only stuff that I've done. And I think that it's really cool that, you know, that it is making a comeback, and it is, you know, a way for people to collect this masterpiece. And it ain't just going to be a typical vinyl. It's going to fold out 3 different ways. It's going to have a bunch of live photos that we took. A girl named Stephanie Cabral, it's a friend of ours, took pictures of us live, which is inside the record and stuff like that. So 2 of the vinyls are the actual album, Demanufacture, that's been remastered for vinyl. And we also did a live recording that we did at Ozfest, in 1996. So you can hear, you know, a young Fear Factory, you know, playing these songs in 1996. And it actually sounds pretty good. I was really surprised how well it sounded. We went into mix the live tracks. We didn't want to take away from anything that that we recorded. So, you know, we didn't overdub anything or nothing like that. We edited a few things and put things a little bit on time, you know, because there was a little bit of, you know, you know, when you're having fun on stage, sometimes you're not exactly paying attention to the timing, you know what I mean? So we wanted to, you know, correct things in that way and edit it. But as far as leaving the original tracks and the original guitars, bass, drums, and vocals and keyboards, we left it all there.
Well, I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you, Dino, is just talking about this now, and in terms of you just saying, you know, you listen back and it's pretty good. With an album like Demanufacture, which you lived through, do you revisit it a lot? Do you go back and listen to your old stuff a lot, or are you sort of more focused on, you know, what you're working on now?
Definitely you want to, I kind of, you know, sometimes look back at that record quite a lot, because, you know, it was a groundbreaking record, and I go back sometimes just to listen, not to the tones or anything, but listen to the structures. But a lot of times I apply those structures into newer songs. You know what I mean? Like, okay, how did I write a song like Zero Signal? How does it go? How does it start? You know, where does the verse go? You know, where does the midsection go, and blah, blah. And sometimes I apply it. Like if I'm stuck on a new song, I'll go back to Demanufacture and be like, okay, that's how I did it. So let's go back and apply it to this song. You know what I mean? Even though the songs are completely different, the riffs are different, it's still something that helps me craft songs today.
Dino, thank you so much for talking to us today. We really appreciate it. Everyone should go out and pre-order the 25th anniversary deluxe 3 LP set of Demanufacture at the link below this video. It's available right now, but there's a limited amount, so you should pre-order yours now.
I also want to say thank you for having me up on here. I'm excited for everybody to hear this record. When it was remastered for vinyl, you know, we wanted to make sure that it sounded the best for vinyl, as well as all the live tracks and the studio album. And I think it's a gem for anybody who collects anything Fear Factory. This is really cool that they get to hear what the band sounded like live back in 1996. So please, yeah, pick it up. Like I said, I think it's an ultimate collector's item. And thank you very much.